Today I'm building a cabinet for my shop. I'm currently unorganized. I have very little actual storage. And as you can see, the one behind me here is actually falling apart. I'm going to use less than 1 sheet of plywood and 50" screws, 2 knobs and 2 hinges. I'm going to show you how I built it, the mistakes that I made, the tools that I used, and what you could do instead if you don't have those tools. And then hopefully show you that it's less daunting to make a cabinet than you might actually think. Lastly, I'm not going to use plans. I'm going to give you all the dimensions along the way. I realize that may sound scary for some of you, but I've got every step covered along the way, so come check it out. Alright, once your pieces are out of the vehicle, you just grab your circular saw and I want you to set the blade depth to just past 3/4 inches, and once that's done, you're going to set a piece onto a surface you don't care about or with that stuff underneath it. The shell, there are only 2 cuts here. In total, 5 pieces. The 2 sides is going to be 30 inches in length by 12 inches deep. You need 2 of those pieces. That's the first cut. The second cut is the top, the middle, and the bottom. These 3 pieces are identical, and they're going to be 28.5 by 11.25. That makes up your 5 pieces for your shell. All right, so you're going to line up at 30 inches. And then you're going to make the cut there. And with that 30-inch piece, you're going to make as many of the 5 pieces as you can. Once you run out, you're going to cut another 30-inch piece. You're going to rinse and repeat until you have all your 5 pieces. And yes, 3 of those pieces will have to have 1.5 inches cut from them to make them 28.5. And that right there is why you don't want to care about what you're cutting on, or use the purple stuff. And yes, I could have clamped the piece and then run the circular saw over the edge where there's nothing underneath, but I didn't want to risk breaking the piece towards the end when I'm losing support. Oh, and this is my wife's feet, just in case anyone cared. Whether you choose to make your cuts on a table saw, the Jimmy rig track saw that you saw me do just earlier, or a real track saw, as long as you end up with 30-inch pieces, you're good. Then you're going to take those pieces and run them lengthwise to make up your 5 pieces. So you set your fence to 12 inches, run your 2 pieces, and then you're going to reset your fence for 11.25 inches, and then run your 3 pieces to make up your 5 pieces. Once all your cuts are done, make sure you label all your pieces. So I have side A, side B, top, middle, bottom. It'll be important for the steps that are coming up. Dados. This is not a required step. If you were going to do dados, I made mine with a 1/2 inch straight bit at 1/8 depth. And I used 1/4 inch dividers for this. If you don't have a router, that's no problem. You could use 1/2 inch dividers or 3/4 inch and make pocket holes and fasten them that way. And you could also screw in from the top and bottom to fasten them. So just something to keep in mind. You can skip this step entirely if you don't have a router or if you don't want to make dados. Okay, just make sure that your pieces are flush end to end, and then you're going to clamp both pieces to make sure they can't move. At the opposite end, I'm going to secure a piece of tuck tape just to make sure they can't move, and make sure that your 2 pieces are flush or the dado depth will be different. Okay, so really quickly, a little bit of math. So I am going to have 4 inserts, meaning I'm going to have to divide my 28.5 inch piece by 5, which gives me 5.7. But that's no good, we're using a tape measure. So we're going to round to the nearest 16th. 5.7, ditch the 5, use the 0.7 times 16 for 1/16 of an inch, equals 11.2. Ditch the 0.2 for rounding off to the nearest 16th, and you have 5 and 11/16. Mark a line every 5 and 11/16 on that board. Mistake number 1, I clamped my fence to the table with an empty gap between them, creating a bow in the fence, allowing it to move. No bueno. I should have put a block between them to close that gap, and the vibrations of the router wouldn't have been able to deflect the fence. But I'm happy to make the mistake so that you don't have to. And I just want to be clear about something, that when done correctly, using makeshift fences like this are incredibly useful for so many things. Did you see it move? What can I say? I'm a human being. Or am I? Anyway, when you're done making all of your hopefully not crooked dados like me, you'll go ahead and you'll just remove the clamps and then the tape. Make sure to give both surfaces a sand. It won't be the last opportunity to do so, but we're getting close. The sand really does help brighten up the plywood. And also I don't need any leftover pencil marks, as the dados easily identifies the pieces now. And I'm going to call this mistake 1.5. Pocket holes. 4 pocket holes on each side, evenly spaced at the bottom. 4 on each side, evenly spaced at the top. And 4 on each side, evenly spaced on the middle. Make sure that for one board, your pocket holes are on the opposite side of your dados, And the other board, your pocket holes will be on the same side as the dados. If you didn't use dados, it doesn't matter. Okay, grab yourself a combo square and set it about 1/4 inch above the top of your Craig jig as a reference to mark your board. Next, mark your lines using the same method as before with our dados. The board is 11 1/4 long and we have 4 holes, so divide 11 1/4 by 5, making it an easy 2 1/4 inches apart for your lines. So you're going to set all your lines at a 2 1/4 inch apart for all your 3 boards. Now you can actually see where your lines are when you go to drill your pocket holes. Alright, so we're going to give these a quick sand here. It's pretty much the end of the line for these guys, so we'll just make sure they're in really good condition because we're going to fasten them after this. Rabbets. Okay, I chose to do rabbets for 3 reasons. Only 2 are practical. I recently built myself a router table fastened to my table saw, which I made a video for. So I really wanted to try it on something. And the other 2 reasons are because it allowed me to fasten the back directly to the side panels, allowing me to reinforce the build without showing any exposed screws on the side. If you are making rabbets, your back piece's width will be 29.5, and if not, it'll be 28.5, just like the other 3 pieces. Okay, so what Ben from the past is trying to show you here is that if there is a bow in the plywood, as sometimes plywood naturally does, to make sure that the bow is facing downwards. That way the bit can hit the plywood at an even depth the whole way through. If the bow was facing the top, you could end up with an uneven rabbet. I'm using a 3/4 inch straight bit starting at a very low depth, maybe 1/8 of an inch, and incrementally adding that with each pass, making sure to run both pieces one after another so I don't have to come back later and reset the depths, and to ensure that both pieces are identical. If you don't have a router and you still want those rabbets, you can refer to the dado section of this video and just follow that concept to achieve them, or you can do them with your table saw. I've got a test piece here that I'm going to use for demonstration to show you. Set the height of the blade for whatever depth you need. Here we needed it set at 1/2 inch. Mark the length of the rabbet, which is the thickness of the plywood that is going to rest into it, and make sure the fence is perfectly aligned to the blade. The last thing we need here is a crooked rabbet. Start at the furthest point and work your way in, moving the fence slightly with every pass. Remember that your fingers are the priority here. You should actually be using one of these for this task. Make sure your 2 side pieces are aligned and clamped, and draw a line marking the middle piece's position. We have the top, bottom, and rabbet. You're going to measure 12 3/4 from the bottom, mark it on the opposite side as well, and join the marks. The middle piece will sit above this mark. Unclamp everything, and we're going to start the assembly of the shell. Grab everything you need, keep it nearby. Working on a flat surface will help you align your pieces better. Once you have your glue, your drill, your screws, and a long clamp if you have it, this will lead me to the second mistake that I think I made. From the second I applied the glue, I felt as though I had to rush. I could feel the stress of trying to get it assembled fast, and this is significant because it's where a lot of my mistakes happen. Just a side note, the open time on the glue I'm using is like 30 minutes. I had plenty of time, but I wasn't thinking. You can see I'm kind of finicking with it. I was feeling hot because of the stress. Oh, and real quick, be careful not to break your rabbet by over-tightening with a clamp. And then you'll see I'm also camming out with my drill. Anyway, it's just a reminder to remember to breathe during your projects. They're supposed to be fun after all. Once I was done being a hot mess, I finished adding all my screws, trying not to over-tighten. Some of you may have noticed I wasn't using self-tapping screws, so you can accidentally drive right through your pocket hole. You're free to do as you wish, but I always tighten my pocket holes by hand. For the middle piece, I used a piece of scrap and a clamp to butt up against my board as a physical representation to make sure that my first screw was going into the correct spot. I got lucky with the bottom screw, freehanding it, but you can always try again with the hole above it if you screw it up. Okay. There's nothing particularly remarkable about getting the third and final board installed. Make sure the pocket holes are on the outside, installed the same way as the previous 2, and I'm going to blow us through here to get us to the next step. Ta-da! Alright, the 5th and final piece of the shell. Don't forget to apply glue to the 3 end pieces. I actually forgot to apply it to the middle piece, unfortunately, but oh well. We're just 12 screws away from a completed shell. I used a clamp as a physical representation here, but I think I would have used a long pipe clamp if I had to do it again. After you complete the last corner, you may have to flip it over to work the middle piece. If you do so, just be careful with the rabbet. I don't think I even considered this myself. I realize it's still a 1/4 inch thickness of material, but it would be such a shame if you did all the work and broke it right before the back piece gets inserted. Also, you may have noticed me occasionally pulling out my square. Don't worry too much about this yet. If you're a little crooked when your shell is complete, don't worry. When the back piece is inserted, we'll square it right up. Alright, so for the back and doors, make another quick trip over to your table saw, and with the leftover plywood that you have, figure out how to cut the remaining 3 pieces with what you have left. Keeping the rule from the beginning of the video to cut from your sheet every 30 inches. It's going to depend how you came home with it. For me, I had enough with 1 piece to make the back, and then I had to cut another 30-inch slice from my sheet for the 2 doors. The remainder of your sheet is going to be used to play around with and fill the inside of your cabinet as you please later on. Okay, some people may want help for this step. It'll depend how square your shell is right off the hop. Luckily, my cuts were bang on and my plywood was reasonably straight, so my back piece went in snug as a bug, which is what we want. But it may need some persuasion to go in. Mark your layout for the screws. I've posted the dimensions on the screen. Make sure you account for the 1/4 inch difference on the rabbet sides. Working with 2 drills here is obviously ideal, one for the pilot holes and countersink and one for the bit of your screws. I highly recommend a carbide countersink with a depth stop. I use it for everything. If you don't have 2 drills, that's fine, just hot swap as you go. Once you're flush on your first corner, go ahead and get your first screw in. Then you're going to fasten a screw in the opposite corner. Then in the opposite corner of the same side, you're going to check for square. You can carefully pull it into square with a pipe clamp or with the help from someone if need be. Once you're satisfied that you have square everywhere, finish off screwing the back with your remaining screws. In my experience, plywood rarely comes at the thickness that you purchase it at. For example, my 3/4 inch plywood here is more like 11/16. So if you feel compelled to screw the back to the middle board, be sure to take that into account. For me, it's between 13 1/8 and 13 3/16, measuring from the bottom to the middle of the board. After checking for square one last time before we move on to the doors, I'm happy to report it's pretty square. And you really do have to be close or it'll be hard to align your doors to the frame. At this point, you should have 2 sets of hinges, 2 knobs, a Forstner bit, for me that's 1 3/8, and a drill nearby. I'm also using a portable drill press to ensure I'm going into the door straight. I don't really think that you need it for this particular task, but I have it, so I'm going to use it. If you don't, just go in slow and check the depth frequently with your hinge. Your hinges will have specific instructions on them based on the make and model, so it's hard to give you instructions here, but it'll go something like this. They'll give you a minimum and maximum distance that your hinge needs to be from the edge of the door, and then a height requirement that you need to be from the bottom in the form of a fraction. For example, mine said 1/5 of the total height of the door. Since my door is 30 inches, I knew to place my mark at the 6-inch mark. The knobs are obviously fine wherever you want them. I chose to make a hole 1-inch square from the corner. Once all 6 holes are made, I'm going to sand the doors down before I fasten my hardware, not after. As an added aesthetic feature, I added a roundover to the exterior side of the doors with my trim router, and I also added it to the pivot side of the frame to help the door and the frame blend together. Once that was done, I decided it would be a good idea to give the entire thing a once over with my orbital sander. After I dry fitted everything, I aligned the door to the frame, and then I marked the holes of the hinges and then took them apart. The frame part of the hinge butts up against the edge of the frame and then fastened there. Once that's done, you just rescrew the door part of the hinge to the frame part and voila! You'll have to play around with the adjustments and get them nice and flush. If your doors don't close, you may need to trim a 1/16 of an inch off each door. Make sure it's no more than that and make sure you do them both. Interior and add-ons. I think this was my favorite part of the build because I knew there were no wrong answers here. I mean, make sure it fits. Measure twice! Anyways, you should have everything you need to finish off based on your needs. You have leftover material. You know that the interior dimensions are 28.5 by 11.25. This is also a great opportunity to use any scraps you have laying around. I had a little 1/2-inch plywood and some leftover 1/4-inch plywood that I used to kind of screw around with. Oh, real quick, if you're having trouble getting a piece in, just grab some scrap and a clamp so the other side of the shelf can't fall while you screw in the first side. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Feel free to leave your comments below. I read everything that I get. Future Ben is going to take us home in a second here. Alright, so thanks to everyone who made it this far into our video. I hope that you found it instructive and that you were able to draw some form of inspiration from it. If you like what you saw, like and subscribe. We've got loads of content in the works, so we'll see you guys next time.